Morning, everybody. So I'm going to run through, I'm looking after softwoods and imported hardwoods. Before I worked at ITI, I was actually a carpenter builder. It's a lot easier on my back sitting behind a desk. So I can do this for a lot longer than I can throwing a hammer and timber. So ITI, we use the WoodSolutions domestic timber deck design as our as our installation guides. Basically, it's like a Bible for deck building. So probably we'll start at the ground and work our way up. Correct post installation is a big thing where we see a lot of failure. Most timber needs 75mm clearance from the ground, and when it is concreted in, as you can see here, slope it away from where the post is. What that does is it allows water to run away instead of actually ponding at the post. It's the same even around your gal post supports. You don't want water sitting around, even though they are galvanized, they can eventually rust out. When this isn't done correctly, so even here, this is with a post support, but the post obviously touching the ground meant that the H3 treated post rotted out. Even H4 underground, if not installed correctly, here water running down, rots out the bottom of the post. That rot will eventually just creep up the post. Something that isn't or probably wasn't as big, but is becoming a lot more mainstream now with timber joist and even bearers is joist protection. The benefit of joist protection, it increases the service life of the subframe. There's different types. There's ones that actually space the boards. There's tapes, so they're adhesive. And then there's just the rubber rolls that they roll out, then staple. Some of the adhesive ones have chemical reactions with the screws, and they actually seal around the screws. The good thing about these tapes and also the ones that are rolled out, the rubber rollout ones, this is a double joist normally, and what can happen and does happen a lot is the water gets trapped in between the double joists because a lot of people don't space them apart. As you can see here, this is bridging the two joists, so water isn't able to enter between them. And this is why joist protection is becoming bigger and bigger. Most places where the joist will rot out is always in the top of the joist first, and that's because the water will run down, run through the screws, and then into the timber. And as you can see here, this is the water ingress into this timber joist is causing splitting. What we see a lot and more often is the wrong timber used in your subframes and a lot of low to ground. So these would all be just H3. It's all touching the ground. There's no ventilation. Another big thing is clearing the building material that is sitting underneath the deck before it's done, or having a nice clear under deck area so that water can run away. So if it is low to the ground, there are precautions that you can take, making sure that water from the building can fall away, increasing your deck spacing between your actual boards. So it allows for more ventilation underneath the deck. So there's three main decking profiles that we see in the market. You've got your plain profile, which is normally your rough sawn. A lot of these are used. It's a lot of hardwoods, normally green, used on building bridge and wharves. They're actually screwed to get when these are screwed down, the decking boards screwed tight up. Obviously, being green, the boards, the timber then climatizes, shrinks down, and it gives you your spacing between your board. Then you've got your pencil round, and probably the most common is your reeded profile. These reeds are not to be installed up. They're actually for ventilation, to increase the ventilation underneath the deck. We see it a lot and people say it's for grip. It's not going to make much of a difference. If a deck is installed and it does need a bit more grip on there, there are coatings that can be applied that then give you a better slip rating. So pine, there's two grades of pine decking. Basically is standard grade, and as you can see here, standard grade has knots through it. Preservative, normally ACQ or LOSP, and then there's premium grade. So premium grade or clear grade is defect free, obviously a better quality, closer to the hardwood, and we stock ITI. We stock a few extra profiles in this. No bow ratings on standard pine decking, but there is a product that has just came out. So Flame Fix is a treated pine decking that has a fire retardant pressure treated into the timber with the H3 treatment. This pressure treatment has allowed Flame Fix first to get BAL 29, and as of a month ago, actually passed and achieved BAL 40 for decking. So when testing, the deck is exposed to 40 kilowatts of radiant heat. So here's the deck before. Radiant heat, that's just an image to show. There's also crypts on the deck frame. So these crypts are placed, there's one placed on top of the deck, and that one goes right over a joint in the board, and then there's a crypt underneath, and then it's obviously exposed. And as you can see here on this Flame Fix decking, it's only charred the front of the board. There's no burning on top. To put it in perspective, what 40 kilowatts of radiant heat is, the human body after 3 seconds of 10 kilowatts is in pain. Cotton fabric at 42 kilowatts takes 5 seconds to ignite, so basically will burn straight away. To give a better example, Flame Fix has also been tested for cladding and has passed BAL 40. Started standard pine timber, pressure treated with the DFX treatment. And as you can see here, the only effect of the 40 kilowatts of radiant heat is charring. And a lot of people now are actually paying a lot of money for Japanese Suki barn look on their house. So it could be a good guide. When building in bushfire rated areas, we recommend using the WoodSolutions building with timber in bushfire prone areas. So onto our hardwoods. The key hardwoods, the main one, obviously Merbau. Everybody knows what Merbau is. Merbau is from Southeast Asia, has a bow rating of 29, so it means it can be used anything up to 29. You can also get finger jointed Merbau, same bow rating. Then a few of the other imported timbers that are becoming a little bit more common is Kapur, which is from Malaysia and Indonesia. Depending on where you're located, New South Wales, you wouldn't be able to use this in BAL 12.5 or BAL 19, but other states should be fine, or would be fine, sorry. Then we've got red balau, yellow balau, both from Malaysia, Indonesia and Philippines. and then northern box. A very important part of when building a deck is spacing it correctly. So these snippets are taken out of the WoodSolutions Guide. As you can see here, the smaller the board, the gap's actually closer, because the reason for that is there's more spacing, so there's good ventilation. But as I mentioned previously, if it is a low to the ground deck, increase these spacings. That'll allow for extra ventilation and allow for the frame to actually dry out or moisture to get away. Spacings. This is very important as well, because a lot of people do a lot of deck replacements on old decks, and especially using treated pine. If they're trying to do it on a budget, they could use the 19mm treated pine. That actually, the maximum joist spacing for that is 400mm. So on an old hack out kind of existing timber frame, that wouldn't actually be fit for purpose. Another important part is selecting the right fasteners for your deck. So there's a lot of screw manufacturers that have calculators. So I've pulled this one from the Blackhawk website, and you enter in all of the relevant information, what material you're using, the joist material, the board width, the board thickness, distance from the ocean or salt water, and then it will, after you give it all the information, it actually comes out and gives you the correct screw to use in for that application. Rule of thumb, is normally 2/3 of the thickness of the board, the fastener needs to go into the timber. So if it's a 20mm board, there needs to be a 60mm nail screw, 40 of that has to go into the timber joist. Good practices, and it's not seen as much anymore. When I was a carpenter, I was actually taught by an older carpenter, and this is the way that we actually fastened. And when I asked why, I've never seen it in person, but I have seen photos. It's so that you don't have a massive run of screws straight down the middle, and this can, over time, and especially with water ingress into the joist, can actually split your joist in half. So that's why they stagger the fasteners. Here's a couple of examples of the wrong fastener. I know this is old decking, but wrong fastener used. And as you can see here, the boards have cupped. So there could be a few causes for this: is not being coated, the wrong fastener, and ventilation. The boards are quite tight together, but also we can see in the image, the screw head's quite small. And then we've all over time seen the twist nails, they eventually give way into your softwood joists, and this is also caused from water ingress, it then loosening into the top of the joist. Coating the deck. This is a very important one, and it is also stated in AS 1684 of applying a protective coating. A lot of people do want to go for the grade off look. You don't have to, which then they obviously don't want to apply a coating. Protecting the deck with a coating, there's a few on the market like Q-Tech. You actually put a tint in there to put color into the board. So they do a clear coating. This will protect the deck, but the decking board, but still allow it to grey off. Intergrain has just brought out a coating that is very, very similar. The big benefits of these is, as you can see, the water just ponds on the board. So this is actually an image using Q-Tech. So that's with a tint note. The water's ponding on there. The way Q-Tech works, it doesn't sit on the surface and give you that kind of lacquer look. It embeds into the timber and protects it from the inside out. cleaning back, you can also clean back existing timber and then basically bring it back to life, coat it. So here's some examples of uncoated timber. Well, this one was coated, but the maintenance wasn't kept up. It's another big thing with coatings is the maintenance with your coating has to be kept up. So every year for some can be 2 years, and it also depends on the use of the deck. But if this isn't maintained, then your deck is going to deteriorate quite fast. A few of the coating companies and timber suppliers, we offer it, and I think there's a few others that actually offer pre-coating. The big benefit with pre-coating is that it gets the underside as well, the side that is never going to be able to get to after the deck has been installed. So to give it a full protective coating on all 4 sides, and then it's just the maintenance on the top, it gives your deck that added protection to last further into the life of the deck. Sorry. And that brings me to the end. Thank you.
Okay, Justin, thanks for that. What we'll do, because you want to be short to the time we have available for you, we'll just jump in and ask a couple of questions while we have opportunity. So we have one question. Salvatore, what about T&G decking, a traditional method for bungalows? If you haven't mentioned that, would you use T&G flooring as a decking product?
No, we kind of obviously steer away from that. There's no, you do use this, you've got no ventilation, nowhere for the water to go.
Yeah, we produce a lot of tongue and groove flooring, and it's not warranted if you put it on a deck.
Thanks, Justin. The only place for T&G is really inside the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another question from Anonymous. What is the minimum gap between boards for adequate ventilation? Do you want to have a go at it, Dane? And you're not quite sure I can answer that one for you.
Yeah. It depends on your deck board width, but normally for a 90 mil it's 4 mil, and then for a 140 it's 5 to 6 mil.
Okay, and the idea of that is that it does get the gap between it all. And for ventilation, the key for it, if you're unsure of ventilation rates for underneath decks, is to look at the subfloor ventilation rate for housing. It's a key indicator, so you need to have something of similar size. All right, good. Another question from Sam: do you coat the boards on both sides or only on top? I think you mentioned this, but just say it again, Dane.
So I did mention, so a lot of, and we offer it a pre-coating service, so you can actually buy the boards pre-coated. I've noticed a lot of Bunnings' ads, they only sell their Merbau pre-coated now, so that big benefit, coated on all 4 sides and giving you protection underneath the board that you normally can't get to later in life.
Yeah, I agree. Look, that's a trick. 684 says in it, if you use 684 as your didn't satisfy solution for decking, it does actually say to you to coat all the timbers which are used in the exterior environment. So that means all around. Okay, moving on to another question, and we'll just do one more, and then we'll get on to you, Justin. Here's another one for you, Dane. Is there any timber decking that has a clip system instead of nails?
There is, and Clever Clip, which is used for modwood fasteners, actually do one for Merbau. It wasn't as successful, and it does add a lot of cost on to the installation of your deck.
Yep. Okay. And there's some various other systems out there as well. I actually have used one of those systems on my deck at home, and they work well. But you just got to remember you need that adequate fixing. Okay, we'll leave the rest of the question until later on. Let's get on to our second presenter, which is Justin. Justin, over to you, and take hold of the screen.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for having me. Thanks, Dane and Andrew. We'll just jump into it, eh? So I'm sort of focusing today on hardwoods, in particular Australian hardwoods. That's what we do over at Boral Timber. So we'll have a look at good design and maintenance practices and how it pertains to Australian hardwoods. So resource, as we mentioned, is the Domestic Timber Deck Design Guide No. 21, which actually Boral and WoodSolutions developed some years ago. I'm also going to refer to, we have our own install guide. This is one that I was heavily involved with, and we've just sort of released this this year. So it's built off the back of both the timber design guide from WoodSolutions as well as some of our own sort of species specific information. So you'll see there on the left some of the things covered off in these guides, obviously available on the WoodSolutions website and our website. But there's all sorts of things, termite protection, handrails, balustrades, moisture content, timber finishes, etc., etc. We don't have enough time to go through all of them, and we've sort of covered off a couple already, but you'll see the topics down here on the bottom left that I am going to touch on today. Australian species, as I mentioned. We're going to dabble into a little bit of the non-NCBP legislation and how that applies to decking, equilibrium moisture content, or EMC. Andrew already mentioned the National Construction Code requirements there for subfloor ventilation, so we'll just quickly skim over that. Selection of species, different board widths, and I've got a couple of examples. We'll call it what not to do at the end, just so you can have a bit of an idea of what can go wrong. So this is our quick reference guides available on the website, on our Boral website. I find it's easy just to quickly Google Boral timber quick reference guide. What it is probably a little bit hard to see on that screen, but it's a breakdown of all the species on the left, all the Australian species that we supply, are commercially available, and then it goes through the some of the technical stuff like the properties and whatnot. Your Janka ratings, which is your hardness rating of timber. Interestingly, you know, Australian timbers are some of the hardest timbers in the world, but then it gets into durability. So durability is one of the most important things when selecting decking, obviously in ground and above ground durability, but then there's also your bell ratings. So a timber, for example, second one for the top, black butt, can be used in a bell 29 area, and you'll see anything that's sort of a bell 29 generally we produce into a decking and a cladding. And then your bell 19s as well. Anything that's not sort of durable enough, we'll put it into mainly flooring. So we're focusing on the decking today, but you've got some big hitters like black butt and spotted gum, and your ironbarks are certainly fairly well known in the industry and fairly well used in the Australian timbers for decking. So you can look that up. Download that if it helps in your day-to-day. So just quickly, the non-conforming building products legislation is fairly recent, I think 2017, sort of birthed off the back of these cladding fires that were around, and they come out and said that the entire supply chain is now responsible to make sure that your building products conform, right? So whether it's us manufacturing it or a timber merchant reselling it, or a builder, or a carpenter, whoever's at which point along the chain you are, there's a responsibility for the entire supply chain now to make sure that your building products that are going onto a building conform to the legislation. So if you have a look there, you'll see down the bottom, these are probably the main things to consider, which we've touched on already, but the durability and hazard class in the case of softwood, your bushfire attack level that it's in, your bell rating, and then you might have strength group or structural grading, which can affect, as Dane mentioned, sometimes your spacing. For example, we do a 90 by 22 spotted gum deck, and it can span 600 mil joists. So yeah, 450 is sort of the standard on most 19 mil hardwoods. But if you've got something that's already set up, it's handy to know what these parameters are, because it all sort of gets wrapped up in this non-conforming building products when you're sort of getting into that site and specification and design level. And that's some black butt decking there for anyone interested in the image. As you can see, it doesn't look like black butt anymore because all decking turns grey when it's not coated. and it is becoming a bit of a popular look. Interestingly, you will get in hardwood what they call surface checking. So for a non-maintained or non-coated product, as it wets and dries and wets and dries, it'll expand and contract and expand and contract, and you'll get surface checking all the way along it. Black butt is a durability class 1 timber. So if you look up your durability classes, it's outdoor above ground somewhere in the, the plus 40 to 50 years mark. So it's not going to fall apart anytime soon, but some people are not happy with surface checks and things, and they think that it's a problem. It's not a problem. It doesn't affect the structure of it. It's actually a result of decking not being coated, and it wets and dries. And we'll touch on hydroscopics in one of the up and coming slides, and that's how you'll understand why decking does what it does. All right, so EMC, we call it in the industry, equilibrium moisture content. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I'll just summarize. So timber is hydroscopic. What that means is it absorbs and expels moisture out of the air, basically. Now, we use this a lot in flooring, but it's important to know that this is also pertinent to decking. So if you put, you'll see there the moisture content AS2796. It's kiln dried timber between 10 and 18%. That's the standard. So that covers the majority of the country, right? You'll see there most of the coastal areas. You'll see the blue and the green. You sort of 12.5 up to 13. As you get into the light green, 10 to 11. Some of the yellow areas obviously are getting a little bit less than the moisture content, which means that if they were put outside and not exposed to any elements, we'll get onto that later, they would actually shrink a little bit just from being in the air, because the timber will expand or shrink until it settles out with that equilibrium moisture content. That's what EMC is. It's the point at which timber stops expanding or contracting based on the climatic zone it's in. So you'll see that there in that second paragraph. It says it's the point at which it's neither gaining or losing moisture. Now, with this in mind, when we're looking at decking, decking is exposed to the weather. So you might have periods of fine weather and it's just sort of settling out, or you might install, and we'll show some examples where someone's installed a deck and then 12 months later, they're like, why have all my gaps closed up and my boards are all cupping, and what's going on? It's been good for 12 months. Clearly there's a problem with the timber. What's happening? What's happening is timber is hydroscopic, as you can see by that first point, and it's taking on moisture from somewhere. It could be a lack of gaps in between the boards. It could be uncoated, and so it's been raining and the boards are soaking up. So this is what I say to customers: when timber is dried to that Australian standard, that AS2796, 10 to 18%. We know exactly, we've got a really precise starting point. We know exactly what the timber is going to do from there. If it's exposed to moisture, it will grow. If it's allowed to dry out, it will shrink. So very important. You'll see some of the slides as we go through to keep that in mind. It's a natural product, and it does what nature has, I guess, designed it to do. So, and you'll see a few notes here about the gaps in the boards. And we've got, this is why we recommend different gaps between the boards. And when you're closer to the ground, we recommend a wider gap between the boards. And it's all because of the fact that timber is hydroscopic and it's going to pull moisture out of the air, pull moisture, as it gets rained on. And that's just something to think about, because I think a lot of people don't realize, that, yeah, okay, if it's raining or exposed to weather, timber's gonna react. But even timber in a certain climatic zone, not being rained on, it will pull or expel moisture just from the surrounding air. So that's something that worth thinking about in your design. So I'll jump on to subfloor ventilation. And this is the extract which Andrew mentioned before about the National Construction Code. So Australian Building Codes Board actually defines in many states, if not all, check with your local building authority, but in most cases the deck, and you'll see that there in the sort of orange box, that this requirement doesn't just apply to subfloors, it also applies to decks. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges we face is people not having ventilation under their deck, or not having enough ventilation under their deck. And you can get, for example, timber boards that are hydroscopic, and if there's a lot of moisture in the air underneath the deck, the back of the boards expand, yet the sun, for example, might be beating down on top of the deck, drying it out. So the top of the boards contract, and that's where you get cupped boards. So something to consider. You've got different climatic zones there. You've got the A, Bs, and Cs, and you can look these up in your National Construction Code books. They will show you where it's similar to the map above on the EMC. But there's also whether or not you have an aggregate subfloor with a membrane, or whether you have a no membrane opening. So you can see there's a requirement for certain square millimeters of wall ventilation, depending on the surface. So that's an interesting one to get into, but one that, from my experience, is quite often overlooked. And usually we get the call once everything's gone bad and the timber's all cupped and things are in not a good situation, only to find out that timber's got no hope. As we said before, it's hydroscopic. It's going to do what it has always done based on the environment you install it in. So so have a good read of that for the designers out there, because it's going to come in real handy. Jump into a couple of little examples. You'll see this one here. So it's 134 by 22 spotted gum decking. Looks lovely on install. Problem is a lot of rain, a lot of weather. All the boards took on some moisture. It was coated. You can see some water still beating down the bottom of the right-hand photo. But the problem, as you can see, judging by the swimming pool and the rest of it, is all the boards have now closed. So it's taken on moisture. The boards have expanded as they will, but there's not enough expansion and there's not enough ventilation underneath. So all the boards are closed, and now we've got a compounding problem, right? So water's pooling on top. There's now no ventilation between the boards to help get the moisture out that's causing the problem in the first place. And you're jammed between two buildings, so there's not enough expansion. You could actually strain hardwoods, as I mentioned, are really hard, and if they're not installed right and they want to expand, they can and will, and I've seen it done. They can push walls over. So I'm not saying that's happened in this case, but I'm just saying that if that was allowed to expand any more, then you could actually be doing some damage, potentially structural damage to the buildings. So in that case, it's closed on three sides, so you're not getting unobstructed airflow, and the gaps were not quite as wide as they need to be as per the install guide. So yeah, so these are some of the problems, and I've got a couple of slides, but like they say, a picture paints 1,000 words. So we'll have a look at some of these and see if these ring any bells with anyone else out there who's seen any jobs like this. So here's another little one. Now this was well off the ground. There was plenty of ventilation under the subfloor. Everything was well accounted for. The builder did a pretty good job. However, he only had about a 3 mil gap. Wider boards require a wider gap. And closer to ground boards obviously require a wider gap. So it was just a mil or two under what we recommend, but it was enough to achieve the result on the right-hand side. Just because if you are a mil short on that many boards, by the time you get to the end of that, you could be 100 mil of expansion that you've lost. And so that's the challenge, is just to stick with, and this is why we have the install guides, and because we know that timber's hydroscopic, we know that it's dried to a certain moisture content, so therefore we know what it's going to do, so therefore we know how much gap and how much ventilation you need between it. So yeah, very important to follow that, those guidelines. I'll just sneak on to the next one. couple of other little examples here. The top left, it's obviously too close to the ground. There's no ventilation at all underneath. So what's happened there is all the boards have cupped, and there's just nothing you can do because you've got moisture just trapped behind the board. As I mentioned before, the rear is expanding and the top is not so much, or getting dried out as it dries out, and then automatically that's how your boards cup. So the one to the right of that, the subfloor, it's near a pool and there's a big retaining wall, plenty of space underneath, but the retaining wall is just completely closed. There's no ventilation in it whatsoever. As you can see, all the boards have expanded and they're trying to take boards out, trying to manage it. But it's just all this moisture is trapped behind the boards, and therefore, coming back to timber being hygroscopic, it's expanding. And sometimes you just have to account for, you know, you might get some heavy rain for a certain amount of the year, but they're the times where the deck comes under the ultimate test, right? Because like I said, it could be sitting there for 12 months and it's, you know, it's all good. Then all of a sudden you get some heavy rain and things start to expand and you wonder what the problem is. And then you sort of start flicking through, realizing you haven't allowed enough ventilation or you haven't allowed enough gaps and this sort of problem. So the one down the bottom left, there's heap cup boards because it's hard to see. Well, I don't have the photo, but they basically closed up the entire surround of this house with plywood and took away all the ventilation underneath. So so there's all that moisture just trapped, because if you get rain and you've got some gaps, it goes down between the boards, gets on the dirt underneath, or in this case, there was a slab under there and it was actually pooling on the slab. It wasn't running away from the house. So it's just sitting there about 600 mil below the deck as a bit of a sauna, and the timber, being hygroscopic, is pulling that moisture out of the air and all the boards are cupping. The one around the pool up here, same deal as the one to the left, where there's big retaining walls around it, Besser block walls and no ventilation. So all the boards closed up and started cupping. And that was right in the middle of they didn't even get that finished to hand over. So, and the one on the right was against a wall, and this thing looked great for a while. And then this thing started to climatize, had a bit of rain, and away it went. And it was because it was against one wall of the house, so it's against two walls, but hardwood timber will always expand across the width of the boards. It doesn't expand across the length. So in this case, the wall is out of the shot to the left, and all the boards are closing up, stacking against that wall and then pushing out. It actually started pushing posts over and all sorts of structural elements. So it made quite a mess. And once again, just not enough gaps in between the boards. So, so yeah, look, we've got examples here from all around. There's New South Wales, Tassie, New Zealand. There's a Queensland one. This happens all around the country, and we get this quite a lot. And unfortunately, every time all of these cases, it's not a failure of the product. It's not a fault of the product. The product is dried to a very precise standard. It's all design and installation issues. So generally, the person that's installing it has to wear those rectification costs, unfortunately. So once again, just shows you how important it is to get that right. One thing that is interesting about all those slides and examples is the fact that all of those boards are they're all wide boards, as we call them. So they're we call them a 6-inch board because that's the sawn that they come out of, but they're either a 130 or a 134, which is the sizes. And an alarming number of people, and this could be a design thing or a trend, or maybe it's just easier for builders and chippies to put them down, but an alarming number of people are putting wide boards on close to ground decks. And I feel like I've seen a lot of this in recent years. I feel like it's something that may have been lost in the industry, because if you have a good read of the technical design guide 21, the WoodSolutions design guide that we're talking about, 2.24 clearly says the decking should be the minimum width available and have a minimum spacing between boards. And then our install guide, we actually talk about, you'll see the the close to ground one, where we say the use of narrower boards, 64 to 90 mil, is recommended in these situations. And then we go on about an 8 mil gap between. So you see the different gaps there depending on your board width and proximity to the ground. Basically, you need to sort of understand that these are set up for a reason. So they need to be adhered to. And this is where we find people have problems. The close to ground, I'm just reading through here, require an 8 mil gap. Something to think about. If you have a meter of 130 mil boards close to ground and they all have an 8 mil gap between them, or if you have a meter of 64 mil boards close to ground and they all have an 8 mil gap between them, you're getting a lot more airflow and a lot more gaps on the narrower boards. So I really wanted to, I guess, bring this point to the group, because I feel like it's something very important that we need to understand with the design of decks, is that if you're close to ground or you're close to water, just don't use wide boards. I know it might not be an attractive look, but you know, you're just opening yourself up to all sorts of the problems that we saw previously. I didn't have to go too far. Sort of wrap it up with this. I didn't have to go too far to find a good design. So a few hundred meters from home, there's a local boardwalk, and this is one section of it. The council, this is the council boardwalk, and I was up there the other day, and local council workers were doing some repairs on it, and so I had a bit of a chat, and because I noticed it has quite narrow boards, they're about 60 mil wide, and the guy was saying that he was an older guy in the council. He said it's around about 20 years old, this deck. Now it's close to the ocean, and tidal waters actually, in a high tide or a king tide, actually flow in underneath, so it's very close to water, and we're talking salt water. It's on the bay side of Brisbane. It's close to, you know, it gets a lot of weather elements, but this is a 20-year-old deck. And they're only just starting to replace the boards now, which is quite remarkable. I mean, they've used, obviously, it looks like a grey ironbark or spotted gum, so it's a high durability. It's not affected by a bell rating or whatnot, but the fact that they've used narrower boards and they've done the right thing, I think, has really assisted with the longevity of this deck. It gets very heavy traffic. There's a lot of cyclists going through there. But ironically, the guys, you'll see a few boards in the shot. Ironically, the guys are doing repairs and they're replacing it with wide boards. And some of them they're putting in with no gaps. And I said, why are you guys replacing this with wide boards? And they said, oh, well, you know, they're just a bit easy, we can go get them off the shelf. I said, well, can't you get the narrower boards? And they said, oh, we can, but we've kind of got to order them and wait for them and whatnot. So I just wanted to say, from a manufacturer's point of view, we do produce narrower boards. Maybe they're not in stock at your local timber merchant, but they're definitely available. They're a byproduct of the logging process anyway. Yeah, it'd be good to start seeing more specifications on close to ground Australian hardwood decks in the narrow boards of 64 mils and even 42 mils, because I think long term that's just going to take away a lot of these problems that seem to be popping up a lot more frequently in the last few years. So with that, that's me. End the slide. I'll hand back to you, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Great presentation. So we've got 2 minutes to go. We've got a few opportunities to ask you questions, and I'm going to pick the questions a little bit at random. So, and we'll see what we can do with the last bit. And I'll ask one of either you or Dane to Justin to answer it. One for you, Dane, is anonymous. How can you guarantee these imported timbers are coming from a reliable source?
So we actually offer FSC and PEFC certified timber. So if it is a requirement for the project that is being specified, or it's just somewhat that is something that someone wants, by requesting PEFC or FSC certified timber, you are guaranteed that it is from plantation grown, and no animals were harmed.
Thank you. And also, it's there's a requirement in Australia that the supplier needs to source legally sourced wood. So it's a law, irrespective if the timber is imported or coming from Australia. Moving on, a question from Daniel: is there an acceptable degree of cupping? Justin, we'll let me go with that one.
There's no sort of tolerance that says, you know, if a board's cupped 2 mil or 5 mil or whatever, it's within, there's no parameters. It probably just more comes down to whether there's some kind of safety implications or an appearance thing. I mean, boards will generally only cup if there's a problem with the install. If you've got the ventilation, everything's stable, and coating on the rear is something that Dane brought up. We highly recommend that as well. So it's, yeah, personal preference really.
Okay, well, there, another one from Stuart. And what about clearance gaps or decks over drained concrete slabs?
Yeah, so you still have to achieve that ventilation, that National Construction Code requirement. I would suggest you probably treat it as a floor that as a subfloor that has a membrane, because given that it's a solid, it's not going to absorb anything into the there's no dirt to absorb anything into. So I'd suggest that you could use the lesser of those construction code ventilation square millimeter per linear meter of wall requirements.
Abigail, actually, we'll give you to Justin. What is the situation with internal floors, insulation under boards? You know, does it affect the ventilation under the floorboards?
Yeah, well, it's the same. The 3.4.1 is designed as a subfloor ventilation. We've got, it might be one for another day, but we've got some quite extensive. You can get on their website, have a look at our technical install guides on our flooring. And it's not part of today's topic, but that subfloor ventilation is the same. So definitely required. But there's a whole heap of different, you know, are you floorboards on joists? Are you floorboards on plywood on joists? So, you know, there's a ton of different variables there.
Okay.
The question there, what about sealing the end grain, which it's another good practice to do with your timber framing as well. All H3 treated timber should be sprayed with a preservative retreatment like EcoSeal or NSeal after cutting, notches, any holes drilled in it, basically any timber that is exposed. Another good practice, if you are using H4 or H5 and you are putting it in the ground, put the end that isn't cut. So basically the end that has been fully pressure treated from the mill. You've got more protection basically for the timber.
Okay, thanks for that, Dane. Question, either one, any recommendations, or both of you can actually answer this one. Any recommendation for timber species for substructure? So your bearers and joists. Start with you, Dane.
Not just because I sell hardwood as well, but being a carpenter by trade, I would say softwood. The reason for this is the ease of installation. There's no pre-drilling. It's lighter. I was never a fan of steel framing. Obviously, I wasn't set up when I was a carpenter for that, so I was always going to choose timber. But softwood's just easier to work with. Your thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, look, I agree from an install perspective. It sort of depends as well. We've got some zones. I'm based up here in Queensland. We've got some zones that if you're building a deck, you must use all durability class 1 products. So for that reason, we sell quite a lot of Blackbud F27 durability class 1. So I get it. It is a little bit harder to install. Yeah, I'm similar to you, Dane, got that trade background as well. And yeah, but you might just find that you're stuck with a requirement that you have to do. So it sort of comes down a little bit dependent on the actual build and the zone you're in and some of the council requirements. So
probably another thing to add to that is now in Bal 40 you don't have to use steel because Flame Fix has a subframe that is tested and certified Bal 40.
Good reminder. Thanks, Dane. Justin, another one. Okay, another question. It's about these narrow boards from Jason. Jason asked a question about 68mm wide thin boards, and it's inquiring if a single centre fixing can you do that, and does this contribute to the cupping? So another go on that one, Justin?
Yeah, normally they'd be a single centre fixing. Yep, absolutely. And you'd be hard pressed to get a board that narrow to cut because I don't think I've ever seen it because you've got, well, once again, if the board's cupping, you've got another problem. There's a ventilation problem. So.
Exactly, you can cut, but just there's ventilation issues. So still need those gaps.
Yeah.
All right, one from Graham. Either one of you can answer this one. We're wrapping up with 2 more questions. With everything perfectly installed and maintained, what's the expected service life for a decking board?
So there's durability classes. You can have a look at them. They're fairly well documented, and that's what you have to kind of select based on your area. Like I said, some zones require durability class 1. From memory, I think it's about 40 plus year. So hardwood has a natural durability class, and softwood normally comes under a hazard class, from my understanding. So you can just read the tables, and they'll tell you what the expected life is. And that's my understanding of that is it's an unmaintained product, like that photo we saw in the Sydney Harbour. Like if you're maintaining your timber and recoating, I mean, yeah, like we said, flooring, it can last lifetimes.
Sure. Just a question for you, Justin. When you're referring to the natural durability, are you referring to the above ground natural durability or in ground natural durability?
I am referring to above ground in this seminar because it's all about decking. So yeah, but that's something to consider depending on, if you're doing a post or something. Although to Dane's first slide, you shouldn't be putting timber in the ground like that anyway. There's issues around that, I think.
Okay, one last question to either one of you. Rihanna has asked, any recommendations for decking in subalpine regions?
Justin?
Yeah. Well, just check your durability. I'd be going for a high durability. It'll shrink because look up your EMC. So you can get onto CSIRO and you work an average. There's a calculator, or we can try and get that for you if you need it. But you work out your average humidity and your average rainfall, and it gives you that equilibrium moisture content, that EMC. Once you've got that percentage, you can generally know what the timber is going to do. So let's say it's quite low, being subalpine. Just be aware that it's highly likely in your case that you may need to lay the boards if they come out of the pack at that 10 to 18%. You may actually need to lay the boards with little to no gap, expecting that they're all going to shrink and get to the appropriate gap by the time they acclimatise.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and all excellent questions, everybody. And I'd like to thank the speakers, but Dane and Justin, excellent topic on this thing. It's it's spring sprung, and hopefully all of you are going to go back and oil your deck or recoat your deck over the weekend. I have already on my place, so I'm already ahead of the curve. And by the way, just a thing about coatings. One thing that I learned or been told by an old guy, if the coating system looks like it needs replacing and it's already too late, so it's best to it's easier when the coating is in good quality and it doesn't look like it needs replacing. So that's a good practice. So just automatically come spring each year, redo your decking. Just your CPD questions. They were uploaded onto the chat room a number of times, so you should be able to have that. And just a reminder that this presentation will be available for the WoodSolutions website shortly. Just go to the webinar area, and the certificate will be sent shortly after today's webinar. And just keep it for yourself, and won't be reissued. Just remember, there's a survey question sometimes asked. Please could you fill it out, because it helps us formulate webinar topics that you may like. Just an ad for the next one in 2 weeks' time on the 28th of September. Designed for buildability, tolerance, handling, and speed in construction. So this will be done by Rahan Jones from Subcon, a large timber installer, and Evan Jones from Xlam. So this point in time, I'd like now to say thank you to attending this one. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Justin and Dane. Well done. So I'll hang up now, and because everybody can still hear us, but thank you for your time. It was good covered a lot of the topics and emphasised the ventilation and cupping. It was good to see. Thanks again.